Hey there, welcome back to Story Slices, where we slice through the best Reddit tales just for you. Let's dive right into the first story. The first one is the Tittle story, and it starts like this. I never thought I'd end up in a legal battle with my neighbor over my own property, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. My name's Mike, and this is the story of how my entitled neighbor Karen called the cops on me for trespassing on my own land, and how it spectacularly backfired on her. It all started about 2 years ago when I bought a nice 5-acre property out in the country. I'd always dreamed of having a little land to call my own, maybe start a small hobby farm someday. The property had an older 3-bedroom farmhouse that needed some work, but it was structurally sound. What really sold me was the big red barn out back and the rolling pastures dotted with oak trees. It was picturesque, exactly what I'd been looking for. I closed on the property in early spring and spent that first summer fixing up the house and getting to know the lay of the land. My closest neighbor was a middle-aged woman named Karen who lived in a McMansion-style house about a quarter-mile down the road. We waved politely when we saw each other but didn't interact much beyond that. Things were pretty quiet and uneventful for the first year or so. I focused on renovating the house, clearing out some overgrown areas, and planning what I wanted to do with the land long-term. Karen and I remained cordial but distant neighbors. That all changed last fall when I decided to fence in a portion of my property to keep a few goats and chickens. I'd always wanted to try my hand at raising some livestock, and goats seemed like a good place to start. I hired a local fencing company to install about 2 acres of sturdy wire fencing, leaving the rest of the property open. The day the fencing crew showed up to start work, I got my first inkling that Karen might be difficult. I was out in the yard with the foreman, showing him where I wanted the fence line to run, when I heard shouting from the road. I turned to see Karen stomping up my long gravel driveway, her face beet red. "What do you think you're doing?" she screeched as she got closer. "You can't put a fence there." I was taken aback by her hostility. Good morning, Karen," I said, trying to keep things civil. "I'm just having some fencing put in on my property. Is there a problem?" "Yes, there's a problem," she snapped. "That land belongs to the neighborhood. You can't fence it off." I furrowed my brow in confusion. "I'm sorry, but this is my private property that I purchased. It doesn't belong to any neighborhood association." Karen jabbed a finger at my chest. "Listen here, young man. I've lived in this area for 20 years and that field has always been open for everyone to use. You have no right to restrict access." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Karen, I understand you may have been used to the previous owners allowing people to use this land, but I checked all the property records when I bought this place. There are no easements or public access requirements. This is my private property now and I'm within my rights to fence it." "We'll just see about that," Karen huffed. She spun on her heel and stormed back to her car, peeling out of my driveway in a cloud of dust. I shook my head and turned back to the fencing foreman, who had been watching the exchange with a bemused expression. "Sorry about that," I said. "Hopefully she calms down once she realizes she's mistaken. Let's get back to work." We continued marking out the fence line and the crew got started digging post holes. I put the odd encounter out of my mind and focused on the project at hand. A couple hours later, I heard sirens approaching. To my shock, 2 police cruisers came roaring up my driveway, lights flashing. 4 officers got out, hands on their weapons. "Hands where we can see them," one officer shouted. "Step away from the equipment." Bewildered, I raised my hands and took a few steps back. The fencing crew looked equally confused. "What seems to be the problem, officers?" I asked as calmly as I could. "We received a report of trespassing and vandalism in progress," the lead officer said sternly. "Care to explain what you're doing here?" Before I could respond, Karen's SUV came flying up the drive. She leapt out and started yelling, "That's them, officers! I told you they were destroying the neighborhood's land. Arrest them." I gaped at her in disbelief. Was she really trying to have me arrested on my own property? "Ma'am, please stay back," one of the officers said to Karen. He turned back to me. "Sir, do you have ID on you?" "Yes, it's in my back pocket," I said. "May I reach for it?" The officer nodded and I slowly pulled out my wallet, handing over my driver's license. "My name is Mike Johnson. I'm the owner of this property. These men work for Thompson Fencing. I hired them to install some fencing on my land today." The officers conferred for a moment, then radioed in to run my ID. Karen was still ranting in the background about neighborhood land and demanding they stop the fence installation. After a tense few minutes, the lead officer's radio crackled. "Dispatch confirms property ownership. Address matches driver's license." The officers visibly relaxed, lowering their weapons. "Sorry about that, Mr. Johnson," the lead officer said. "We had to respond to the trespassing call, but it appears this was a misunderstanding." "No, it's not a misunderstanding," Karen shrieked. "That land belongs to all of us. He can't fence it off. The officer turned to Karen with an exasperated look. Ma'am, we've confirmed this is Mr. Johnson's private property. He has every right to fence it if he chooses. You need to leave the premises now. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of purple. This isn't over. She snarled at me before storming back to her car. I breathed a sigh of relief as the police apologized again and left. The fencing foreman whistled low. Man, you weren't kidding about that neighbor being difficult. I shook my head ruefully. I had no idea she'd go this far. I'm really sorry you all got caught up in this. The foreman waved it off. No worries. We've seen all kinds of neighbor disputes. You still want us to continue with the fence? Absolutely, I said firmly. I'm not going to let Karen bully me off my own land. The crew got back to work and I tried to put the stressful incident out of my mind. I hoped that would be the end of Karen's dramatics, but unfortunately, it was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Karen escalated her campaign of harassment. She called the police 2 more times with bogus complaints about noise and eyesores on my property. Thankfully, the local cops quickly caught on to her antics and stopped responding to her calls about my place. When that didn't work, Karen started leaving nasty notes in my mailbox and on my front door. The messages ranged from guilt-tripping, "How could you be so selfish?" to outright threats, "We'll make sure you regret moving here." I saved all of them as evidence, just in case. She also took to parking her car at the end of my driveway and glaring at me whenever I came or went. It was unsettling, to say the least. I started using my cell phone to record video anytime I had to interact with her. The final straw came about a month after the police incident. I came home from work one evening to find my new fence had been cut in several places. Someone had used wire cutters to slice through the metal in at least a dozen spots. I was livid. This was thousands of dollars of damage, not to mention the safety issue of my future animals potentially escaping. I had no direct proof, but I was 99% certain Karen was behind it. I called the police to file a report, then contacted my insurance company. As I was on the phone with the insurance agent, I noticed movement at the edge of my property. I glanced over to see Karen sauntering along the fence line, a self-satisfied smirk on her face. That was it. I'd had enough of her childish, destructive behavior. It was time to take serious action. The next day, I took a personal day from work and drove into the city to meet with a lawyer. I laid out the whole saga, the false police reports, the harassment, the vandalism. The lawyer listened intently, taking copious notes. "Well, Mr. Johnson," he said when I finished, "it sounds like you have a strong case for harassment and vandalism charges, possibly even stalking, given her repeated behavior. Do you want to pursue legal action?" I nodded firmly. Yes, I've tried being patient and taking the high road, but enough is enough. I want her to face consequences for her actions. The lawyer nodded. I understand. Here's what I recommend we do. We spent the next hour outlining a plan of action. First, we'd send Karen a cease and desist letter, formally demanding she stop all contact and harassment. If she continued after that, we'd file for a restraining order and pursue criminal charges for the vandalism. I left the lawyer's office feeling a mix of relief and trepidation. I hated that things had escalated to this point, but I knew I had to stand up for myself and my property rights. Little did I know, things were about to get much more complicated, and ultimately, much worse for Karen. Update: It's been about 6 months since I last updated you all on the situation with my entitled neighbor Karen. A lot has happened, so I'll do my best to catch you up on everything. After meeting with the lawyer, we sent Karen a formal cease and desist letter. It laid out all of her harassing behavior and property damage, demanding she stop all contact with me and stay off my land. The letter warned that if she continued, we'd pursue legal action including a restraining order and criminal charges for vandalism. I had the letter sent via certified mail so we'd have proof she received it. A couple days later, I saw the mail truck pull up to Karen's house. From my kitchen window, I watched her sign for the letter, then rip it open right there in her driveway. Even from a distance, I could see her face contort with rage as she read it. Suddenly, Karen's head snapped up and she glared directly at my house. I ducked away from the window, my heart pounding. A few seconds later, I heard screeching tires. I peeked out to see Karen's SUV tearing down the road toward my place. "Oh crap," I muttered, fumbling for my phone to start recording. I barely had time to hit the button before Karen came pounding on my front door. "Open up, you miserable little twerp," she shrieked. "How dare you threaten me with lawyers?" I took a deep breath and opened the door, making sure to keep the phone recording. "Hello, Karen," I said as calmly as I could. "I take it you got the letter from my attorney?" "Don't you hello Karen me," she spat. "I've had it with your smug attitude. This is my neighborhood and I won't let some punk kid come in and ruin it." I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, I'm 35 years old and I own this property. This stopped being your neighborhood the day I bought this place. Now please leave my property before I call the police." Karen's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "Oh, you want to play hardball? Fine. I've got friends in high places, you know. I'll make your life a living hell. You'll wish you never moved here." With that, she spun around and stormed back to her car. As she peeled out of my driveway, I let out a shaky breath. This clearly wasn't over. True to her word, Karen ramped up her campaign of harassment over the next few weeks. She called in noise complaints to the police almost daily, despite the fact that I wasn't making any unusual noise. She started posting nasty things about me on the neighborhood Facebook group, calling me a menace and trying to turn the other neighbors against me. The worst incident came about 2 weeks after the cease and desist letter. I woke up one morning to find someone had spray painted "Leave" in bright red letters across my barn. I immediately called the police to file a report. As I was talking to the officer, Karen drove by slowly, smirking at me through her car window. The officer noticed and frowned. "That your problem, neighbor?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, that's Karen. I can't prove she did this, but given everything else that's happened." The officer made a note in his report. "Well, we'll dust for prints and see if we can find any evidence. But even without proof, this incident combined with the fence damage and her continued harassment despite the cease and desist, you've probably got grounds for a restraining order now." I thanked the officer and called my lawyer as soon as he left. We agreed it was time to take the next step. He filed for an emergency restraining order that same day. 2 days later, we had a hearing before a judge. I presented all the evidence we gathered, photos of the vandalism, recordings of Karen's threats, the police reports, everything. Karen tried to paint herself as the victim, claiming I was the one harassing her by stealing neighborhood land, but she didn't have any actual evidence to back up her claims. In the end, the judge granted a temporary restraining order. Karen was barred from coming within 100 yards of me or my property for the next 30 days. We'd have another hearing after that to determine if it should be extended. I breathed a huge sigh of relief as we left the courthouse. Finally, it felt like I was getting somewhere. Karen, on the other hand, looked like she was about to explode with rage. As it turned out, the restraining order was the least of Karen's problems. About a week after the hearing, I was out in my yard when I noticed a moving truck in front of Karen's house. Curious, I watched as workers loaded box after box into the truck. A little while later, my next-door neighbor Jim wandered over. "Hey Mike," he called, "you hear what happened with Karen?" I shook my head. "No, what's going on?" Jim chuckled. "Oh boy, you're gonna love this. Turns out Karen works, or should I say worked, for the county assessor's office. When she didn't get her way with you, she apparently tried to use her position to mess with your property assessment." My eyes widened. "Seriously, how do you know all this?" "My sister works in the county clerk's office," Jim explained. "She overheard Karen pitching a fit when her boss caught her trying to illegally change records. Guess she thought if she jacked up your property taxes, you'd be forced to sell." I let out a low whistle. "Wow, that's a whole new level of crazy. So I'm guessing she got fired?" Jim nodded. "Fired and potentially facing criminal charges for attempted fraud. From what my sister said, Karen's trying to move out of state before things get worse for her." I shook my head in disbelief. Man, I knew she was unhinged, but I never thought she'd go that far. "Thanks for letting me know, Jim." As Jim headed home, I stood there processing this new information. Part of me felt vindicated that Karen was finally facing consequences for her actions. But mostly, I just felt sad that things had escalated to this point. I decided to call my lawyer and let him know about this new development. He advised me to write down everything Jim had told me, as it could be relevant if we ended up pursuing further legal action against Karen. Over the next few days, I watched as Karen's house was slowly emptied out. She must have been in a real hurry to leave, because she had an estate sale company come in to sell off a lot of her furniture and belongings. Out of morbid curiosity, I walked down to check out the sale. As I was browsing, I overheard one of the estate sale workers talking to a customer. "Yeah, it's a real shame," the worker was saying. "Lady's basically fleeing town after some big scandal at her job. Guess she tried to abuse her position to screw over a neighbor she was feuding with. Now she's scrambling to sell everything and move before she gets arrested." I quickly ducked behind a bookshelf, not wanting to be recognized, but I couldn't help feeling a twinge of satisfaction that the truth was getting out. A week later, a sold sign appeared in front of Karen's house. She was really gone. I'd love to say that was the end of it, but unfortunately, Karen had one last parting shot. About a month after she moved, I got a certified letter from a lawyer in another state. Karen was trying to sue me for emotional distress and damage to her reputation. She was asking for $500,000 in damages. I'll admit, I panicked a bit when I first read the lawsuit. but my lawyer assured me it was a desperate Hail Mary with no legal merit. She has no case, he explained. You have mountains of evidence showing she was the one harassing you. Her illegal actions at work are a matter of public record, and truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims. She's just trying to scare you into a settlement. We filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit, countersuing for Karen's continued harassment and the costs of defending against her frivolous suit. The judge must have seen right through Karen's ploy, because he dismissed her suit with prejudice, meaning she couldn't refile it. He also granted our countersuit, ordering Karen to pay my legal fees and an additional $10,000 in damages for her ongoing harassment. I doubted I'd ever see a penny of that money, given that Karen had fled the state and was likely broke after losing her job. But it still felt good to have the legal system fully acknowledge how in the wrong she'd been. In the end, it took almost a year, but life finally returned to normal. I got my goats and chickens, built a nice vegetable garden, and settled into the peaceful country life I'd always dreamed of. Karen's house sold to a lovely retired couple who couldn't be more different from her. We've become good friends, often sharing produce from our gardens and looking out for each other's places when one of us is out of town. I still think about the Karen saga from time to time. Part of me wishes I'd stood up to her more firmly from the beginning, but mostly, I'm just grateful it's over and proud that I didn't stoop to her level or let her bully me off my own land. If there's a lesson in all of this, I guess it's that sometimes you have to stand your ground against unreasonable people. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to use the legal system when necessary. But also, try to take the high road whenever possible. Karen's own actions were ultimately what brought her down, not anything I did to her. These days, my property is everything I hoped it would be when I bought it. The fence is repaired, the barn repainted, and the land is thriving. Every so often, I sit on my porch swing with a cold drink, watching my goats graze in the pasture, and I think about how close I came to losing all of this to Karen's misguided vendetta. In those moments, I'm reminded of how important it is to fight for what's right, even when it's difficult. I stood my ground, and in the end, that made all the difference. As for Karen, I heard through the grapevine that she's struggling to find work in her new state, given her history of misconduct. Last I heard, she was living with her sister and working part-time at a big box store. I don't wish her ill, but I can't say I'm upset that she's faced consequences for her actions. Maybe, just maybe, this whole experience will teach her to treat people with more respect in the future. But even if it doesn't, at least she's no longer in a position to abuse her power or harass innocent homeowners. For my part, I've become much more involved in local community organizations. I joined the volunteer fire department and I'm on the board of our local 4-H club. I want to be a positive force in this community, to show that you can be a good neighbor without trying to control everyone around you. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much drama and stress one entitled person can cause. But I'm proud of how I handled it, and I'm grateful for the support of my real neighbors and the legal system. If you're ever in a similar situation, remember, document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. It might be a long and stressful process, but in the end, doing the right thing is always worth it. As for me, I'm just looking forward to many peaceful years enjoying my little piece of countryside, drama-free and Karen-free. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow at Story Slices.